The Galactic Academy's Xenobiology class was buzzing with its usual energy that Tuesday afternoon. Students from 12 different species sat clustered in their preferred study groups, some hovering above their seats, others requiring specialized chairs to accommodate unusual body structures. The massive lecture hall had been designed to host this kind of diversity, with adjustable gravity zones and atmosphere controls that kept everyone comfortable despite their wildly different biological needs. Professor Velshera stood at the front of the class, her crystalline body catching the light and scattering it across the walls in gentle rainbow patterns. She was in the middle of explaining parasitic life forms that affected spacefaring species when it happened. The pleasant hum of academic discussion was shattered by an alarm that started low and then built into a screech that made everyone's equivalent of ears hurt. The reinforced doors at the back of the classroom were rated to survive explosive decompression, asteroid impacts, and even direct weapons fire. They buckled inward like they were made of paper. Metal shrieked and tore. Smoke poured through the gaps. Then something massive crashed through the ruined doorway and everyone's worst nightmare became reality. A Kroth warrior stood in the doorway, and it was exactly as terrifying as the stories made it sound. 3 full meters of armored death, covered in chitinous plates that could deflect plasma weapons like they were toys. Its mandibles were the size of a human forearm, sharp enough to cut through starship hull plating like butter. 6 limbs, each one ending in blade-like appendages that gleamed under the classroom lights. Compound eyes that saw in spectrums most species couldn't even imagine, currently rolling in their sockets like it couldn't focus on anything. But the worst part, the part that sent genuine terror through every student in that room, was the foam dripping from its mandibles and the jerky, uncontrolled way it moved. This wasn't just a Kroth warrior. This was an infected Kroth warrior. Neuroparasite infection. Every student who'd paid attention in their xenobiology classes knew exactly what that meant. 97% kill rate. No survivors. No mercy. Just pure, unstoppable violence driven by a parasite that hijacked the host's brain and turned them into a killing machine. The classroom exploded into chaos, but it was organized chaos. These students had all passed advanced survival training to even be here. The insectoid Churi students released clouds of distress pheromones so thick you could see them in the air, calling for help in the only way their species knew how. The crystalline lumens did what their species had evolved to do when predators came calling and dimmed themselves almost to invisibility, their bodies becoming nearly transparent as they tried to disappear into the background. The aquatic students in their water-filled environment suits started hyperventilating so hard their breathing apparatus struggled to keep up, water sloshing violently inside their protective gear. Professor Velshera's voice cut through the panic with the kind of authority that came from decades of teaching. Her appendages moved across her communication device with practiced speed, her form flickering with stress patterns even as she maintained her composure. Security drones were being summoned, emergency protocols activated, medical teams put on standby. Everything by the book. Everything exactly as it should be. And everyone in that room knew it wouldn't matter. Security drones took time to arrive. Time nobody thought they had. The Kroth took a lurching step into the classroom, and that's when everyone realized just how wrong its movements were. It wasn't hunting. It was staggering. Its bladed limbs scraped against the floor in patterns that made no sense. It swiped at empty air like it was fighting invisible enemies. Its massive head jerked from side to side, mandibles clicking in rhythms that spoke of confusion and pain rather than predatory focus. Foam and something darker dripped from its mouth. Its eyes couldn't seem to fix on anything, rolling and focusing and unfocusing like it was seeing things that weren't there. Students scrambled for the emergency shelter positions built into the walls. Panels slid open, revealing reinforced compartments that could protect them from vacuum, radiation, and hopefully from this. Bodies pressed together regardless of species, fear making everyone forget about personal space or atmospheric preferences. Tesvier, a Quilarian student whose species communicated partially through shifting colors across their skin, had gone a shade of pale terror that her species hadn't shown in thousands of years of recorded history. Her appendages trembled as she signaled desperately toward her study partner. Tommy Brooks, the only human in advanced xenobiology, was still sitting in his seat. And he was laughing. Not the high-pitched, nervous giggle of someone whose mind had snapped under stress. This was genuine, from-the-belly laughter that echoed through the terrified silence like it was the most natural thing in the world. His hand rested on his stomach, his shoulders shaking, his face lit up with something that looked almost like delight. The sound cut through everything else. The alarm seemed quieter. The panicked breathing of his classmates faded into background noise. All anyone could hear was this human, this small soft creature from a planet most of them had barely heard of, laughing at the thing that was about to slaughter them all. Tesvier's colors flashed through patterns of absolute horror and confusion. Her appendages waved frantically at Tommy, signaling in every visual language she knew to hide, to run, to do literally anything except sit there drawing attention to himself. Tommy just waved her off with one hand, still chuckling, his eyes fixed on the Croth with an expression that nobody could quite understand. The Croth roared. The sound hit like a physical force, rattling equipment and making the reinforced windows vibrate in their frames. It slammed one of its bladed forelimbs down onto a nearby desk, and the furniture simply ceased to exist, reduced to metal fragments and powder that scattered across the floor. This was a creature that could tear apart combat vehicles. This was death on 6 legs. This was the end. Tommy stood up from his seat, casual as anything, like he'd just noticed something mildly interesting during a boring lecture. He tilted his head, studying the Croth the way someone might study a puzzle they were trying to figure out. His classmates stared at him with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for watching stars collapse into black holes. He was going to die. They were all going to die. But he was going to die first, and nobody could understand why he wasn't running. His voice carried across the classroom, clear and loud enough for everyone to hear, and the words that came out of his mouth made absolutely no sense to anyone listening. Those 2 words that would later be replayed millions of times across the galactic network, analyzed by xenopsychologists and behavioral specialists and philosophers trying to understand the fundamental difference between humans and everyone else. Tommy Brooks looked at 3 meters of armored death and said with genuine sympathy in his voice, "Oh man, look at that poor thing. Poor thing." He'd called a Croth berserker a poor thing. Tesvier's colors cycled through shades that didn't exist in her species' normal range. Other students made sounds of disbelief in a dozen different languages. The Croth itself seemed to pause, confused by sounds that didn't match any prey behavior in its parasite-addled database. Tommy shook his head slowly, and his expression wasn't fear or even bravado. It was pity. Genuine concern. He looked at this creature like it was suffering, like it needed help, like it was something to be cared for rather than something to run from. And then he smiled, not the terrified grimace of prey trying to seem non-threatening, but an actual warm smile like he'd just run into an old friend who was having a really bad day. The distance between sanity and madness had never seemed smaller. And Tommy Brooks had apparently decided which side of that line he was going to stand on. Tommy started moving in a slow circle around the edge of the classroom, keeping his steps smooth and deliberate. The Crotha's massive head tracked him, those compound eyes trying to focus but failing, rolling in patterns that looked more confused than aggressive. Every instinct the creature had developed over millions of years of evolution was screaming that prey should run. Small things ran. Weak things fled. That's how the universe worked. But this tiny soft being wasn't running, and the Crotha's parasite-infected brain couldn't process what that meant. Tommy kept talking in that same conversational tone, like he was discussing the weather with a friend rather than circling a killing machine. He gestured casually toward the creature's head as he spoke, pointing out details that everyone else had missed in their terror. The Croth had angry, swollen tissue around what looked like a puncture wound near its cranial cavity. The area was inflamed, probably infected, and definitely causing serious pain. Professor Velshera found herself actually listening despite the absolute insanity of the situation. Her academic training was wrestling with every survival instinct she possessed. This human student was performing a clinical diagnosis while standing close enough to be killed in half a heartbeat. He was treating this like a medical case instead of a life-or-death crisis. Her appendages shook as she pulled up the medical supply inventory on her datapad, some part of her brain apparently deciding to go along with whatever madness the human had planned. Tommy glanced back at the professor without taking his full attention off the Croth. He asked for specific medical supplies like he was requesting library books rather than tools to treat a berserker. Heavy sedatives designed for massive specimens. Surgical extraction equipment. A tissue regenerator. His tone was calm, practical, like this was all perfectly reasonable and normal. The professor's voice came out steadier than she felt as she confirmed the supplies were available in lab storage. But her words carried an edge of desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this insane human actually knew what he was doing. The security protocols could be overridden by faculty in emergencies. This definitely qualified as an emergency, even if it was the strangest emergency any of them had ever seen. Tommy called back asking for a volunteer to pilot a medical drone to bring the supplies. The silence that followed was deafening. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then a small voice piped up from one of the shelter compartments, and another human emerged from cover. Rita Hayes stood barely 5 feet tall with bright red hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wasn't even supposed to be in this class, had just been visiting a friend when the lockdown hit, but apparently she'd decided that watching another human do something stupid without helping was worse than staying safe. She moved to the drone control station with quick, confident steps, her hands already dancing across the interface before Tommy could finish thanking her. Her response was pure practical determination, telling Tommy to shut up and give her the details. She was short, direct, and clearly operating on the same kind of logic that had Tommy approaching a Croth instead of hiding from it. Container 7, got it, she confirmed, already launching the drone into the lab storage area. The Croth roared again, and this time the sound actually cracked one of the reinforced windows. The noise was pure agony wrapped in fury, the kind of sound that spoke of suffering beyond what most beings could imagine. Tommy flinched slightly at the volume, the first real reaction to danger he'd shown, but his feet stayed planted. He kept talking to the creature in that steady, reassuring tone, telling it he knew it hurt and asking it to just hold on a little longer. Tesvia finally found her voice, colors shifting through patterns of desperate confusion as she asked the question everyone wanted answered. How was Tommy not terrified right now? How was this possible? How could any living being stand that close to death and stay calm? Tommy's answer was so casual it somehow made everything even more surreal. He explained that he was plenty scared, but fear was just information. It told him there was danger, which was obvious, but it wasn't telling him to run. It was telling him to be careful and focused. Then he compared the Croth to a bull named Crusher from back home on his family's ranch. Mean as anything according to everyone who met him, until they figured out he just had an infected tooth. Once they fixed that, the bull was gentle as a kitten. Professor Velshera's translator struggled to process what she'd just heard. This human had compared a Croth berserker, one of the most dangerous predators in known space, to farm animal with dental problems. The logic was there if you squinted at it sideways, but the casual way he made the comparison spoke to a completely different way of seeing the universe. Tommy crouched down slightly, making himself smaller and less threatening. The Crotha's movements were starting to slow, becoming marginally less erratic. It was still incredibly dangerous, maybe more so because of how unpredictable it was, but Tommy seemed to see something everyone else missed. He spoke directly to the creature, telling it that he could see the intelligence still fighting through the parasite's control. Asking if it knew something was wrong, if it recognized that this wasn't really who it was. The medical drone emerged from storage carrying supplies that would have been impossible for Rita to carry manually. She piloted it with surprising skill, bringing it to hover just outside the Crotha's reach. Her question about what came next was edged with dark humor, calling Tommy Dr. Brooks in a tone that was half joking and half genuinely impressed with whatever plan he had cooking. Tommy said the fun part was coming next as he moved toward the drone. The Croth tensed immediately, and Tommy froze with his hands visible and open, palms up in a gesture of peaceful intent. He kept talking in that constant stream of calm words, telling the creature he was just getting medicine to help. The specific words didn't really matter. It was the tone, the rhythm, the steady presence of a voice that promised safety instead of threat. He reached the drone and examined the supplies. The sedative injector was massive, designed for creatures the size of earth elephants. The Croth would need multiple doses to go down safely. But Tommy didn't reach for the sedative. Instead, he pulled out the surgical kit and the tissue regenerator, and several students made sounds of horror as they realized what he was planning. Professor Velshera started to protest, her voice rising with academic concern. Manual extraction while the subject was fully conscious was beyond dangerous. It violated every medical protocol ever written. Tommy finished her sentence for her, acknowledging that yes, it was insane, but explaining his reasoning with the kind of tactical analysis that suggested he'd been thinking about this since the moment the Croth crashed through the door. Sedatives took time to work. They had maybe 4 minutes before security drones arrived with lethal force authorized. If he sedated the Croth first, it would collapse in the middle of the room where he couldn't properly access the wound. The geometry didn't work. The timing didn't work. The only option that had any chance of success was the one that looked like suicide to everyone watching. Professor Velshera's tone shifted slightly as she asked if Tommy had really analyzed the tactical situation. There was academic curiosity breaking through the terror now, the part of her that studied behavior recognizing she was witnessing something unprecedented. Tommy confirmed he'd been analyzing from the start, explaining that everyone else saw a monster but he saw a patient with a bad infection and a very narrow treatment window. He was opening the surgical kit now, each movement slow and visible and non-threatening. The Croth watched with those rolling eyes, its bladed limbs scraping the floor as it fought whatever hallucinations the parasite was forcing into its brain. Then it made a sound that was almost a whimper, and Tommy's whole demeanor softened even more in response. He spoke gently, acknowledging the creature's pain, promising to make it stop even though it would hurt for a minute first. He was moving closer with surgical tools in hand while the entire classroom held its collective breath. Rita kept one hand hovering over the emergency alert, ready to summon everything the station had if this went wrong. Tommy reached the point where he was just an arm's length away. The size difference was staggering up close. The Croth could end him with a casual movement. Those mandibles could bite him in half. One swipe would be enough. But Tommy extended his hand slowly, palm up, in the oldest gesture of peace that existed. He narrated his intentions, telling the creature he was going to touch it now, just to check the inflammation around the wound. Nothing more. Nice and easy. His hand made contact with the chitinous armor, and every being watching thought they were about to witness a death. The Krotha's entire body went rigid. Time seemed to stop. Then the impossible happened. The Kroth lowered its head slightly, granting access to the wound. Giving permission. Showing trust to this small creature that had approached with kindness instead of weapons. Tommy's face split into a genuine smile of relief and triumph. He praised the creature, told it that it was strong, that it was still fighting, that it was winning against the parasite. Professor Velshera was recording everything now, her academic mind recognizing that this footage would change everything they thought they knew about interspecies interaction. Tommy examined the wound carefully in the harsh light from Rita's drone. Everyone could see it now, the parasite burrowed deep into neural tissue that controlled aggression and threat assessment. No wonder the Kroth was seeing enemies everywhere. Its own brain was being hijacked and weaponized against it. Tommy took a deep breath and started talking through the procedure like he'd done this 100 times before. Standard extraction protocol, he called it, comparing it to removing a tick from a dog, except the dog was 3 meters tall and could kill him by accident. When Tesvier called out that this wasn't reassuring, Tommy just grinned and told Rita to hit the emergency alert if things went sideways. Rita confirmed she was ready, her finger already on the button. Tommy picked up the numbing compound, steadied himself, and began what would become the most watched medical procedure in galactic history. Tommy's hands moved with careful precision as he applied the numbing compound around the infected entry wound. The cold gel made contact with the Krotha's inflamed tissue, and the massive creature flinched hard at first touch. Every student watching expected that flinch to turn into a killing strike, expected those bladed limbs to sweep through the air and end the insane human who'd gotten too close. But instead, something unexpected happened. The Krotha's breathing started to slow down. The jerky, panicked movements eased just a fraction. The creature seemed to recognize that the cold sensation wasn't causing more pain but actually bringing relief for the first time since the parasite had burrowed into its skull. Tommy kept up a steady stream of words, his voice low and soothing. He told the creature that the cold felt good, that it was helping with the swelling, asking it to just stay with him a little longer. The way he spoke wasn't clinical or detached. It was the same tone someone might use with a scared friend, full of genuine care and concern. He worked the numbing agent into the tissue around the wound with gentle, practiced movements that spoke of experience doing exactly this kind of thing, just usually with creatures that couldn't accidentally kill him. What Tommy was attempting should have been impossible on every level that mattered. First off, Kroth biology was notoriously complicated. Their neural clusters weren't concentrated in one place like most species. Instead, they had a distributed network throughout their entire body that didn't follow any logical pattern that galactic medicine had figured out. Treating them was difficult even in the best circumstances with a cooperative patient. Second, every medical authority in known space classified approaching an infected Kroth as a suicide attempt, not a treatment option. The survival rate was 0. Period. And third, most incredibly, Tommy was doing emergency surgery on a fully conscious patient that could tear him apart at any second. But Tommy had grown up on a ranch in Wyoming where the nearest veterinarian was over an hour's drive away. When an animal was hurt or sick, you didn't wait for professional help while they suffered. You learned to do what needed doing yourself right then and there. He'd pulled porcupine quills from dogs who fought back the whole time. He'd set broken legs on horses that outweighed him by half a ton. Once he'd even removed an arrow from a deer that had wandered onto their property with the projectile stuck in its shoulder. His father had taught him early that scared animals could sense your fear, but they could also sense when you genuinely wanted to help them. That awareness went both ways. Tommy studied the wound site and announced that the numbing agent should be working by now. He explained he needed to widen the entry point to get a clear view of where the parasite had attached itself. His tone stayed matter-of-fact as he told the Kroth this would feel like pressure but shouldn't hurt, and if it did hurt, the creature should let him know. The casual way he spoke, like he expected the Croth to actually communicate with him, made several students wonder if the human had completely lost his mind. The Croth made a clicking sound, rapid and rhythmic. Professor Velshera's translator couldn't quite parse it properly since Croth language wasn't well documented in general, and certainly not the vocalizations of an infected individual in distress. But Tommy seemed to take the sound as agreement, nodding once before selecting his next tool. He picked up something from the surgical kit that looked disturbingly like a miniature saw with vibrating teeth. Rita, watching through the drone's camera feed, made a small noise of distress and asked if Tommy was really sure about this plan. Tommy's response was honest in a way that probably wasn't comforting. He admitted he wasn't sure at all, but they were committed now, too far in to back out. He positioned the tool carefully against the wound's edge, told the Croft to take a deep breath if it could manage one, and began the delicate work of expanding the opening. Sweat started beading on Tommy's forehead despite the classroom's climate control keeping the temperature perfectly comfortable. This was precision work that required absolute steadiness. Too little widening and he wouldn't be able to reach the parasite. Too much and he'd cause serious damage to the neural cluster right underneath. His hands stayed rock solid as he worked, making tiny adjustments based on what he was seeing and feeling through the tool. Rita asked him to talk through what he was seeing, keeping him focused and giving everyone else some idea of what was happening. Tommy described the parasite embedded deeper than he'd initially thought, with thin tendrils wrapped around the primary aggression center like roots through soil. That explained why the Croth was so worked up, why everything it processed was being filtered through the parasite's chemical signals that turn normal sensory input into threats and targets. But there was good news too. The main body of the parasite was still relatively intact and separate. If he could get a clean extraction, they might avoid permanent damage to the Crotha's brain. Tesvier's voice cut through, colors flashing urgent patterns as she announced security drones would arrive in approximately 2 minutes. If they showed up and assessed the situation as an active threat, which they absolutely would, protocol demanded immediate lethal response. Tommy acknowledged this with a simple confirmation that he knew, then asked Professor Velshera to contact security and let them know the situation was in progress. Under control being too strong a claim but at least not a massacre in motion. The professor was already moving, transmitting Tommy's medical assessment along with live video feed. Security came back demanding updates every 30 seconds. Tommy muttered that there was no pressure then, his tone dry with humor that probably helped keep him calm. He had the entry wound widened to his satisfaction now, and with better access plus Rita's perfectly positioned lighting, everyone could see the parasite clearly for the first time. It was nightmare fuel made real. A writhing purple-black mass about the size of Tommy's fist, with thread-like tendrils extending into the surrounding tissue like it was claiming territory. The thing pulsed with its own rhythm, completely separate from the Crotha's biology, a parasite in the truest sense living off its host while destroying them from the inside. Tommy switched to a different tool, something that combined aspects of forceps and surgical scissors. He told Rita he needed her to keep the light absolutely steady, no movement at all, not even a millimeter. Rita's response was to lock her hands on the controls and announce she was basically a statue now, her whole body gone rigid with concentration. Tommy announced he was about to start severing the connection points where the parasite had anchored itself into the Crotha's neural tissue. He warned the creature it would feel weird sensations, might see flashes of images or emotions that weren't really its own. That was normal, just the parasite trying to maintain its hold as it died. The Crotha's mandibles clicked rapidly in what might have been acknowledgement or might have been fear, but it held perfectly still. Tommy began the painstaking work of cutting away tendrils one by one. Each cut had to be absolutely precise, close enough to remove the parasite's influence but not so close that he damaged the delicate neural tissue underneath. He narrated each step, partly for the recording devices that were capturing everything and partly to keep himself focused on the process rather than the danger. With each severed connection, the Crotha's body language changed in visible ways. The jerky movements smoothed out. The rolling eyes started to focus and track properly. It was like watching someone wake up from a nightmare in slow motion, consciousness and control returning bit by bit as the parasite's grip weakened. Tesvier's voice was barely a whisper as she announced that Tommy was actually doing it, actually succeeding at something that shouldn't be possible. Tommy told her not to jinx it, but there was the hint of a smile on his face now. He severed the third tendril, then the fourth. The parasite started writhing more violently, probably sensing its host slipping away from its control. Tommy calmly noted he was almost there, just 2 more connections and then he could extract the main body. The 5th tendril was positioned awkwardly, requiring Tommy to adjust his angle and reach. As he shifted position, the Croth suddenly jerked hard, its bladed forelimbs sweeping upward in an instinctive defensive movement. Time seemed to slow down to a crawl. Rita screamed. Professor Velshera's form flashed with alarm colors bright enough to light up the whole room. Students who'd been watching in horrified fascination looked away, not wanting to see the inevitable. Tommy dropped flat to the floor, and the massive blade passed through the space where his head had been a fraction of a second earlier. The air displacement from the near miss ruffled his hair. He could have run then, could have scrambled away to safety while he still could. Instead, he immediately started talking again in that same calm, steady voice. He told the creature it was okay, that the movement wasn't its fault, that was the parasite making one last attempt at control. He acknowledged that he knew it was hard, but they were almost done, just one more minute. The Croth froze with its limbs still raised in the air, blade gleaming under the lights. Then slowly, with visible effort and control, it lowered the weapon back to the floor. The deliberate nature of that movement, the clear conscious choice to not attack, told Tommy everything he needed to know. There was definitely still a thinking, feeling being in there fighting the infection with everything it had. Tommy thanked the creature softly, told it that showing that kind of control took real strength. He could see it now, could see the person behind the parasite's puppet show. He repositioned himself and went back to work with hands that somehow still weren't shaking, severing the 5th and 6th tendrils while security drones entered the outer corridor. Retry. Tommy gripped his tools firmly as he prepared for the final extraction. The parasite was now only attached by its main body, all the connecting tendrils severed and lying limp against the Crotha's neural tissue. The thing pulsed with what looked like rage or maybe fear, sensing that its time was running out. Tommy could hear the security drones getting closer, their mechanical hum echoing through the corridors outside. He had maybe 60 seconds before they burst in with weapons charged and orders to terminate the threat. 60 seconds to finish what he'd started. He positioned his extraction tools around the parasite's main mass, getting the best grip he could manage. The creature was slippery and kept trying to contract itself, probably attempting to burrow deeper into the host tissue to avoid removal. Tommy took a steady breath, centered himself the way his father had taught him when doing difficult work with animals, and spoke clearly so the Croth could hear him. He told the creature this was it, the moment they'd been working toward, and he apologized in advance because this part was going to hurt no matter how careful he was. Tommy counted down from 3, his voice calm and measured. On 3 he pulled with firm, steady pressure. The parasite resisted immediately, its body contracting hard as it tried to maintain its grip on the only host it had ever known. The Croth roared, and the sound was pure agony that shook the entire classroom like a physical force. Windows rattled in their frames. Equipment fell off tables. Every student who was watching cowered back except for Rita, who kept that drone light absolutely steady, and Tommy, who kept pulling with consistent pressure that never wavered. Something in the parasite's attachment finally gave way. The thing came free all at once, writhing in Tommy's grasp like a living nightmare made of organic material and malice. It was heavier than it looked, pulsing with its own disgusting rhythm as it tried desperately to reattach to anything nearby. Tommy reacted on pure instinct, hurling the parasite into the medical containment unit that Rita had wisely positioned nearby. He slammed the lid shut just as the creature launched itself at the opening, trying to get back to its host or find a new one. The sealed container held firm, trapping the parasite inside where it couldn't hurt anyone else. Rita shouted in triumph that the parasite was contained, but Tommy wasn't celebrating yet. He spun back to the Croth with antiseptic and tissue regenerator already in hand. The wound was bleeding now, thick green-black Croth blood oozing from the cavity where the parasite had been living. The sight was disturbing, but Tommy had seen plenty of blood in his years helping with ranch animals. Blood meant the body was still working, still trying to heal itself. He could work with that. He flooded the wound cavity with antiseptic, washing away contaminated tissue and parasite residue. The Croth shuddered but didn't pull away, showing incredible trust or maybe just being too exhausted to fight anymore. Tommy applied the tissue regenerator next, watching carefully as the damaged neural tissue began knitting itself back together at an accelerated rate. The technology was amazing, doing in seconds what would take weeks naturally, but it still needed guidance. Tommy monitored the regeneration pattern, making small adjustments to ensure everything was healing in the right configuration. The Croth had gone completely still now, its breathing shallow and rapid. Tommy kept up a steady stream of encouraging words, telling the creature to hang on, that it was almost over, that it had been incredibly brave through all of this. He checked vital signs as best he could with limited equipment, watching the creature's eyes for signs of shock or system failure. The security drones burst through the doorway right on schedule, weapons primed and glowing with ready energy. Their targeting systems locked onto the Croth immediately, and onto Tommy, who was still kneeling right beside it covered in green-black blood. The drone's artificial intelligence struggled to process what their sensors were telling them. Every algorithm said this should be a massacre scene. There should be bodies, destruction, chaos. Instead they found a conscious Croth that wasn't attacking, and a human student who appeared to be providing medical treatment rather than fighting for his life. Professor Velshera's voice rang out with more authority than anyone had ever heard from her before. She ordered the drones to stand down, declared that a medical procedure was in progress, and commanded them not to engage under any circumstances. The drones hesitated, their programming warring with direct orders from faculty. They were designed to protect, programmed to eliminate threats, but also required to obey authorized personnel in non-combat situations. Tommy finished applying the regenerator and sat back on his heels, finally allowing himself to breathe properly. His hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off, but his voice stayed steady as he announced that the subject was stable, the parasite was contained, and the wound was treated. He looked up at the nearest drone's camera and told them directly that they could power down their weapons because the crisis was over. The lead drone processed this information for what felt like forever but was probably only a few seconds. Then its weapons powered down, though they stayed ready to fire if the situation changed. The drones took up defensive positions around the room, clearly prepared to intervene instantly if needed but accepting for now that immediate lethal force wasn't required. Tommy finally let himself really look at the Croth. The creature was breathing easier now, deep steady breaths instead of the ragged gasping from before. Its eyes, all of them, were focused and clear for the first time since crashing into the classroom. The rolling, unfocused gaze was gone. Real intelligence looked back at Tommy, aware and present and processing what had just happened. Tommy asked simply how the creature was feeling, his tone gentle and genuinely concerned. The Croth made a sound, low and rumbling, that the classroom's translator couldn't quite process at first. Then slowly, deliberately, the massive creature lowered its killing mandibles in a gesture that Professor Velshera's database identified as something remarkable. Not submission, which might have made sense from defeated prey. This was respect, a gesture Croth warriors only gave to those they considered truly worthy. Tommy smiled, exhausted but deeply relieved. He told the creature it was going to be okay now, that the worst was over. He stood up slowly, his legs shaking as the full reality of what he'd just done crashed over him like a wave. Rita abandoned the drone controls and rushed over, her small frame somehow catching Tommy as his knees buckled. She was talking rapidly, her words tumbling over each other as she called what he'd done the craziest, most reckless and most amazing thing she'd ever witnessed in her entire life. Tommy's response was classic human pragmatism. He said it was the only thing that made sense given the circumstances. Then his legs fully gave out and Rita had to support his weight, proving that even Deathworlders had their limits. The adrenaline crash was hitting hard now, his body finally registering all the stress and danger it had just pushed through. The Croth watched this with its newly cleared mind, processing everything with fresh perspective. This strange small creature had approached when everyone else fled. Had seen pain instead of just danger. Had treated a killing machine like a patient deserving care and dignity. The Crotha species had rigid concepts of honor and debt, and what had just happened created a bond that wouldn't easily be broken. Medical teams were arriving now, rushing in with proper equipment and trained personnel. They swarmed around the Croth with professional efficiency, conducting scans and assessments while carefully keeping the creature calm. One of the medics, a being that resembled an octopus made of liquid metal, examined Tommy briefly before declaring him physically unharmed though clearly exhausted. Tesvier finally emerged from her shelter, colors still showing stress patterns but overwhelmed with relief that her study partner was alive. She moved to Tommy's side, appendages fluttering with concern as she checked him over for injuries. Other students began emerging too, looking at Tommy with expressions that ranged from awe to disbelief to something approaching fear. The footage was already spreading across the galactic network. Students had been recording on personal devices. The classroom's security system had captured everything. Within minutes, billions of beings across known space would watch a human laugh at a Croth berserker, then save its life with nothing but basic medical supplies and apparently no sense of self-preservation. But in that moment, Tommy just leaned on Rita and watched the medical team's work, satisfied that the Croth was going to survive and recover fully. To him, this had just been problem-solving under pressure. To everyone else watching, it was proof that humans operated on completely different rules than the rest of the galaxy, and those rules were about to change everything. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.